Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast. Thank you, as always, to our patrons who make the podcast possible. You guys faithfully support us.
Yes.
And we faithfully offer you rewards that are really cool in return. We are very happy with the rewards and the trainings that we do. We do a live Zoom training. We do a live Q&A once a month. We do an exclusive podcast once a month. What else do we do?
It's pretty exciting, isn't it? It really is.
We do another
The
Zoom,
book
a live
club,
book club once a month.
We do. And the participation just keeps growing and growing.
It does.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
It's really good.
So we do a lot, and our patrons do a lot, and we can't thank you guys enough. If you want to support the podcast, visit patreon.com/speakingout and sign up, even if it's for a month. If you want to help for a month, then go for it. There's no obligation. We don't hook you and drag you along and make you feel guilty for canceling. Yeah. It's not even a subscription. Mm-hmm. It's just, you support as long as you want, and when you're done, you can be done. So we want to talk about statistics. We have a new year, and this year already has proven to be pretty challenging for a lot of people. So I'm a little bit, I don't know. I'm excited about the new year. I'm not going to lie. I'm excited about it, but I'm also like, all right, what could happen this year?
Cautiously excited, yes.
So anyway, there's just a lot going on in the world, and we thought it would be important to talk about statistics, because sometimes we do like, what's our prediction for this year? Where do we think the trajectory is moving,
right.
in
and a recap
abuse.
of the previous years,
right,
to see where we are,
So we look at, I usually do this once a year. I look at the statistics in Pennsylvania from the Department of Human Services. They do an annual report, pretty extensive report, and they give statistics. They kind of break it apart, and then they talk about what's going on in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so I printed off a couple charts, and I just want to I want to look at this because I think these numbers are so telling. So I want to go back to 2011. I want to go back because I'm going back 10 years because the most recent statistics we have are from 2021.
Right.
So I'm kind of doing a 10-year snapshot. In 2011, which ironically, or incidentally, I guess, is the year that we made our report,
right,
of my dad. That was also the year of Jerry Sandusky. 2012 is when Jerry Sandusky was sentenced. So anyway, this was pre-Jerry Sandusky at Penn State. In Pennsylvania, there were 24,378 reports of abuse. Of those 24,378, only 3,408 were substantiated. And I'll talk about that a little bit later about why those numbers are so skewed. Post Jerry Sandusky, Pennsylvania passed a whole bunch of legislation that really put a lot of emphasis on mandated reporting and increased penalties for mandated reporters who fail to report. And, there was mandated training for mandated reporters, on and on and on.
I think that whole time period was an awakening to us of abuse. It was talked about before. Mm-hmm. That's when the big opening of the book of the Catholic Church came out. Of course, the Baptist Church, and you kind of follow along, and it's like all these big things were opened up to us, whereas before we didn't hear the word abuse.
Yeah, and
It
that time
just
frame from
really,
2011 to that really was the I think the genesis of it. But
yes,
I mean, it started before that certainly,
it did.
but
But
it
I
it
mean,
was ramped up from 2011. Jerry Sandusky, you're right.
right?
That was
Yeah.
kind of a big time marker, because then
Yes.
you had Bill Cosby, you had Me
Yep.
Too, you had Church Too, you had
Yep.
the SBC scandal, you had the Catholic Church, the
Right.
uh, grand jury investigation
Oh.
for Altoona Johnstown
Right.
Diocese. That was 2016. On the heels of that was the remaining 7 dioceses in Pennsylvania, and that was
Yep.
the grand jury report of 2018. Then you had all these Catholic survivors descend on Harrisburg.
Right.
Now, I don't know if you know this, Mark Rossi won. He's the Speaker of the House in
Is he
Pennsylvania.
really?
Yeah,
I did not
yeah.
know
So
that.
as of a couple weeks
I'm
ago,
very happy to hear that.
so the first thing that Mark Rossi
Oh.
has, Mark Rossi has on the docket, I guess, is this 2-year window.
So
He's
happy
really
to
pushing
hear
it.
that. Yeah.
And Josh
be
Shapiro, of
good.
course, now is our
Right.
governor.
And I'm happy about that.
And
yeah.
Governor Shapiro is really going to push this 2-year window. Governor Shapiro was all
good
for it, and
stuff.
him and Rossi
Right.
work really well together. So it'll be interesting to see what's happening here in the state. But that's kind of an aside. But yeah, I mean, there are all these huge events, and you're seeing the dominoes start to really come into play
Right.
now, and it's just interesting to see how this is unfolding. So, let's see. The number of reports from 2011, I don't have 2012 printed off, but it basically doubled. So it went from 24,000 to around 50,000 reports a year. What's interesting to me is that the number of substantiated cases of abuse didn't really increase. It's always been right around that 4,500 to 5,000 substantiated cases per year for the entire state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth. And to me, that's a little bit telling. And what that tells me, just based on reading and trying to understand and wrap my mind around this, is that the number of calls dramatically increased. The number of substantiated cases of abuse didn't.
Not,
It didn't align with that.
No.
So it's really skewed now. And I think a big part of that is there's a lot of confusion over what's reportable and what's not. Still, even though there's training for mandated reporters, there's a lot of confusion over what's
There's
a reportable
confusion
incident.
and hesitation. Let's face it. There really, really is.
Yeah.
Even though people know they should probably report, they're going to remain most of the time on the safe side and not report and do their internal or their own investigation first, which is kind of scary.
Well, but you also, I mean, you do have an increase in the number of reports given, and I think that's true. I do think that's true. We're still seeing a lot of
do
mandated
too.
reporters
Yeah.
not reporting, but there's another factor to that, and it's mandated reporters who get this training, and the mantra is, if you see something, say something. If you think, even if you don't think it's a reportable incident, report anyway.
it anyway.
And so what happened is our call lines got absolutely overwhelmed. And you can actually look. We did an audit. Harrisburg did an audit because there were people on hold for like an average of 2 hours at a time.
Which is crazy.
And there were,
Yeah.
I forget how many tens of thousands of calls went unanswered. So that 50,000, 50,000-ish reports is probably something more like close to 100,000.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not a true number. Yeah.
And so the number of substantiated cases of abuse, that means it was found that there was in fact abuse. It may have been turned over to the police for further investigation, et cetera, et cetera. Those cases remain pretty much flatlined. And there are a couple things going on. One is our police departments are absolutely overwhelmed,
They are.
understaffed,
And
overburdened,
still undertrained.
undertrained.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Boz Javijan talked to me about that before. He said it is unreal
Sure.
the lack of basic training
Right.
that police departments have in how to handle abuse cases and how to investigate. So this is a really big problem, and it's kind of a compound problem. But then you had another problem on top of that, and that is the pandemic. So pandemic, you had people forced to be in their homes, which I still think it was the absolute worst policy. That did far more damage.
It's terrible.
Far more damage to the psyche of people
Yeah.
than anything else. I mean, the number of suicides skyrocketed. They're still very high. The number of fentanyl overdoses and drug overdoses in general skyrocketed, unprecedented. In fact, I have an article here. I want to pull this up. This blows my mind. This is an article by NPR, npr.org. 2022 was a deadly, in parentheses, but hopeful year in America's opioid crisis. This was just published December 31st, last month. Data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention suggests the avalanche of overdose deaths, driven largely by the spread of illicit fentanyl, may have crested in March. Researchers found a staggering 110,236 people died in a single 12-month period, a stunning new record. All right, so in the article, and I'm obviously not going to read the whole thing, they said basically it takes so long, there's such a lag in reporting statistics that we have no idea what's going to happen in this year, in 2023. But we do know the life expectancy dropped by several years per person just because of drug overdoses. That actually it's the lowest in the United States. We have the lowest life expectancy that we've had in over 20 years.
That's frightening. It really is. And the whole drug issue, to me, is very frightening because it says we're not able to cope with daily life.
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing it.
That's right.
And something's causing that. And, it's a combination of things, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
The financial state of the nation,
Yeah.
the job situation of the nation, plus the mental breakdowns of people in general due to some of these things. And, something happened and we hit that critical tipping point where people just said, I give up. I can't deal with it. And it's a lot, our young people, not all young people, we've several older people have done this, but the drug issue seems to be in that middle age group. And if you notice, Jimmy, a lot of these deaths are from people that you would look at and think, wow, what happened?
It's professionals.
What happened?
It's
Yeah.
married,
Right.
like you said, middle age. A lot of them are middle aged people, but they're working full time. They come
Right.
from what seems to be stable homes. Clearly, that's probably not the case if they're turning to fentanyl.
Just not coping
No.
with the daily stresses. Life is overwhelming for most of us. And the setbacks that happen from COVID are no joke.
Oh, no.
A lot of people lost family members under horrible circumstances. How do you deal with all of that?
Right.
There was no outlet for it, no help available.
No.
And
People seeing their loved ones dying
yeah,
through
alone,
a window.
And
They
how do
couldn't
you-
even go in to physically be with
No.
their loved ones.
So I think you're
who were
right.
dying.
This restraint of people in their own homes, becoming prisoners in our own homes, taking people away from their jobs, forcing them not to go to work.
Right.
That's
The
the first time in my life
Mhm.
I've ever been prohibited to work.
Right.
And it was the most bizarre feeling ever.
Oh, absolutely.
Just bizarre. Children taken out of school
Mm-hmm.
and forced to sit in a home situation, many of them alone.
There's such a lag in education still
Oh, yeah. Oh,
because
there
of
will
keeping
be.
kids
Sure.
home, and many of these kids, millions of these kids were not getting education because
No.
the parents who could still work would go to work, and they didn't have anywhere to send their kids.
There
The
were no
daycares were shut down.
right. So children were forced to take care of children, take care of themselves, which all of this combined escalates abuse, anger issues, depression, and we have a ball of a mess here
It's
going on. So, I think these numbers are terribly skewed. I think they're terribly off course, but they still give us a good picture that, hey, we have some major problems here. Major problems to deal with.
Yeah, I mean the number of reports decreased dramatically during the years of COVID. So 2020 and 2021. The number of reports decreased pretty dramatically, but the number of substantiated claims hovers still right there around 5,000.
To me, that says that kids weren't in school, so teachers didn't see children that were being abused. Our kids were not in daycare, so daycares couldn't report that Johnny came to school with an arm that was, bruised and no explanation for it. All of these things because kids were confined at home. No other eyes were looking and watching them. And it's heartbreaking when you think about it. Very, very heartbreaking.
I mean, even aside from the abuse, if you think about, you just wrap your mind around over 110,000 people dead. And I believe that statistic was just fentanyl. That doesn't include all the other drug and alcohol overdoses. If you think about that, I mean, the vast majority of those people have children. Those are children now who, a lot of them probably witnessed their parent actually die in the home. But even if they didn't personally witness it, they still lost a parent. And now they're dealing with that trauma in addition to missing 2 years of school, in addition to all the abuses that went on in the home. When you have drug abuse, oftentimes you have other forms of abuse. And on and on and on and on.
You take a parent away, and maybe that was the working parent in the home. So now you have poverty. So look how many people are living in poverty right now.
Right.
Scraping for just the bare minimum
We
of
haven't
food.
even seen the tip of the iceberg on that either.
Not yet. And it's a dismal picture for sure. But those of us who are living somewhat stable lives need to pay attention here. Because this is a crisis in front of us.
It is, and it's, I heard, I like Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad.
Too. Yeah.
You either like him or you don't.
Just tell it like it is.
Yeah, and I really like him, but he's talking about this big bubble that's bursting right in front of our eyes, and he says, in 2000 we had the .com bubble. Then you had the housing bubble, 2008. You had the housing bubble. He said, this is now the everything bubble.
It is.
And he said, everything has absolutely been so just injected full of propping up and our economy. And look at the supply chain issues that we're already having.
Really bad.
Daycare. My wife this morning, I said 2 S's. This morning.
Oh, dear.
She wakes up and she goes, oh, my goodness. She's already super short-staffed. She needs a minimum of 10 staff just to be operating at normal capacity.
Now, she's operating a daycare.
She's the director of a daycare and preschool. So this morning she wakes up and she says, oh my goodness, I just got a call. I only have one employee over there. I had another one take off and I forgot to schedule another opener.
Oh,
she goes, gotta go. She was like, just jumped out of the shower.
Yeah.
She's like, I need to run and get to work.
Wow.
So she takes off. She was telling me we have such a shortage of daycares and daycare workers right in our town. We have people driving out of state to drop off one kid at a daycare, and then they'll drive 40 miles another direction to drop second kid off at a different daycare. These daycares are absolutely
stop right there,
understaffed.
because I don't think people can kind of absorb what you're saying. When that goes on, that means it's critical for that parent to work.
Exactly.
That wears you down when you're doing that.
And the financial burden.
At some point,
on the fuel.
you just say, I'm done. I give up. And that's where this other stuff kicks in. You
That's
need
right.
you kind of form a codependency with either alcohol or some other kind of drug. And I'm not judging in any way. I'm just saying this is how innocently it often happens because it's hard to cope under those
Yeah.
circumstances. You're stressed to the max. Our agencies that would normally help are overburdened,
They've always been,
understaffed.
and now they're really overburdened.
Now they're really overburdened and they don't have the funding for it
That's
either.
right.
I'm seeing more and more. I work a lot with agencies and their funding. They're crying out for help. They don't have funding to help
Yeah.
like they used to. So we have homeless, we have the drug issue, we have the mental issues. Our mental hospitals several years
Terrible.
ago were all but taken away. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
We don't have mental health help like we need. There's a
Domestic
big
violence is on the rise.
Oh, yeah.
I just saw an article again about police forces. There are police forces that are experimenting with hiring ordinary citizens as like kind of like sheriffs will deputize
Right.
somebody.
Deputize
so,
you.
So now
Just-
police departments are doing the same thing, or they're talking about it at
Right.
least. I think there are some cities that are actually trying it out because they don't have
They don't
people
have
on the
the help
force.
to
They don't
keep-
have,
right.
and there's now like hashtag kill the cops and all
Right.
this bull crap going on where
Who
people
wants to go after that job?
exactly right. Nobody in their right
Right.
mind would want that job. And we have another part of the bubble. So Robert Kiyosaki talks about the everything bubble.
He's
talking
right.
about the economy,
Yeah.
but it's a lot deeper than the economy.
Oh,
It's the
yeah.
everything
Yeah,
bubble
it is,
where you have a migration crisis. The border crisis is so bad. It's so bad, which is bringing in fentanyl and bringing in, all kinds of other kinds of crime. And it's bringing in poverty. These people
Right.
are genuinely homeless people,
Right.
and they don't have anywhere to live.
No.
It's impossible to find housing for millions of people who are pouring across our border. Morale at the border is at an all-time low.
yeah.
They're
Yeah.
so short-staffed.
Yes. Well, I'm going to add another thing here.
it's
Our
wild.
prisons are opening their doors, flooding thousands of prisoners
Out.
out the door into society.
That's right.
Add to that then another little twist. People have been running from churches. They've been running from God. This is the the decade where you will see more empty churches than church pews filled. And you are kind of the oddball now. If you are teaching your children, bringing your children to church, living, and I'm not saying that's everybody, but look in your own community, people, and you'll see it's true. It is really true. And I'm seeing that. I see people making statements like, there is no God, there never has been, it's a joke. The whole thing, without a foundation of faith also upon which this nation was built, we're crumbling. We're from the very top fragment up, down.
Yeah.
We really are.
Yeah.
And we've just kind of not paid attention.
It really is. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
everything bubble. I mean, there's so much that's on the brink of collapse, and it's we have. I might have said this on the last podcast or two podcasts ago, but the daycare a quarter of the mile up the road from our house closed down. It sits empty.
It's a shame.
And we're
We
seeing
see
that
so
here in
many
this
empty-
town
oh, yeah,
and all
yeah.
over the place where these daycares
Right.
are shutting down because they have staffing issues.
Right.
Restaurants. I just saw a
yeah.
Facebook post.
Big
Two
restaurants or
two
chain
restaurants here
restaurants.
locally
Yeah.
just closed, and they
Right.
said closed effective immediately due to staffing crisis. We're going to see more and more and more of this, and these are business owners
And
who have
part
debt.
of that staffing crisis is finding people who are not on drugs. And I'll be very
That's right.
blunt.
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
absolutely
I
right.
go through the hiring process and I cycle through people. Drugs is a big issue.
Yep, they won't
with
pass a drug
staffing.
test
Yeah.
or show up to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, yeah. Right.
Yeah. So this report on child abuse, statewide child abuse. I want to read this because I think this is really significant. This is the 2021 report. The percent of reports of suspected child abuse that were substantiated decreased from 14% in 2020 to 13.2% in 2021. Statewide substantiated reports of child abuse increased from 1.7 per thousand children in 2020 to 1.9 per thousand children in 2021. Sexual abuse remains the leading category of substantiated abuse, followed by physical abuse. Parents continue to be the persons most responsible for abuse of their children. These kids are living in their own hell. They're living in the place. Now think about this. They're at school, which may or may not be a sanctuary from abuse. If they don't have abusive teachers who are targeting them, which happens really often in schools, assuming that they're lucky enough to not be abused at school, they go home to what's supposed to be a sanctuary, a safe place. And it's a house of horrors. They have parents abusing them.
It's so sad. You have poverty, you have the sexual abuse, you have the physical abuse, you
neglect.
have abuse between mom and dad going on. You have the depression again. You have the anger issues. You have the whole ball of wax. Throw in some health issues in there besides.
Yeah.
COVID didn't go away. Pneumonia didn't go away. Flu didn't go away. Kids need help through this. You have parents who don't have the money to take their kids to doctors or are not able to because mentally they're incapacitated. And it's a very bad, volatile situation. You have kids that don't know who to go report to. And if they do report, you have agencies that say, we're out. We're out of money. We're out of staff. We're out of time. So, and to lean on, which it would be nice if we could lean on your churches for some help. Churches are struggling.
I can tell you how overburdened. I mean, we are absolutely overwhelmed. And we're not alone.
No, and it's across our nation. So what do we do with all of this?
Run for the hills.
No, that's not the answer I was looking for.
I think it kind of goes back to what we talked about in our podcast a couple podcasts ago where we talked about domestic violence. We need all hands on deck. We need everybody to help. We need people to notice when kids come into school wearing one shoe or no shoes. This is happening. It sounds like fairy tale bizarre stuff, but it's happening. Or notice when kids aren't showing up at all to school. We can't leave it up to mandated reporters to report abuse. And, quite frankly, I think it's so bad that I think prevention has taken a back seat because now it's to the point where we're lucky if we even have enough wherewithal to make a report when abuse is blatant. Right. And even when abuse is blatant, the number of substantiated reports is so small. It's virtually an impossibility.
For
a statistical impossibility.
That anything's what you're saying is so true, Jimmy. And I just hope people are listening with wide open ears. I've had a saying that I've lived by all my life that discouragement is the devil's greatest tool. And I do believe it is. If Satan can get you and me and others discouraged, what happens? It's like pulling the rug out from under our feet. We cave and we give up. We say, it's too big, it's too much. I can't change this, and we give up. And that's happening because the issues are big. They truly are.
They're huge.
They're huge, and they are many. They're not single-fold. They're multifold. So I always believe that where do we start? We start here. We start right in our own little circle. We all know at least 5 people. And within those 5 people, we know that there's going to be abuse going on. We know it. Statistics prove it. Statistics data backs that up.
Mm-hmm.
That you can look on a church pew, and every fourth person down, you'll know somebody's been abused.
Mm-hmm.
Fact, right?
Yeah,
So all
absolutely.
we have to do is begin with our own little circle of 5.
Mm-hmm.
Who do we know? And reach out. Just
Yeah.
consistently reach out. And you might be saying, how? Reach out with kindness, reach out with visits, reach out with communication,
Mm-hmm.
all the things that have kind of been stripped away because of this 10-year massive mess we've been living through.
Yeah,
And
I think payment is due. I think the years and years and years of abuse and covering up abuse and all this stuff. I think it's finally come to a head,
right,
and the debtors are knocking on the door, saying,
yeah,
"We're here to collect."
right,
And I think
yep,
we're just I think we're in for a ride. In this article that I mentioned and read from, this NPR article, it says 2022 was a deadly but hopeful year in America's opioid crisis. The reason that they said they're hopeful is because of the Biden administration has come up with policies to make it tougher for doctors to prescribe opioids. That's the hopeful part. And I'm like, this is not just that's like one of those tiny little circle band-aids on a gaping wound. Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's don't get me wrong. It's good that the administration is doing that. I think they do need to toughen up on opioids that are being prescribed to patients, but that's not the issue. You want to start taking care of the fentanyl issue. Take care of the
street drugs
border.
are so easy
Stop.
to get. It's
It's
almost a
terrible. They're
joke.
coming from Mexico. A lot of
Yeah,
these.
right,
Um,
yeah,
and there's a massive amount of drugs that are just pouring across the border. Then you have, that's just the drug part. Then you have the violence. You have,
right,
and don't get me wrong too. I mean, there's a major issue. I'm all for gun reform laws. Making it tougher for people to get background checks. Look at the mental health crisis.
oh, yeah, right,
There are a
yes.
lot of people who have firearms who have no business having a firearm
I
in their
mentioned this
possession.
before.
It's a
I
big
had
issue.
to get a check, a background check for a firearm that I bought for work. It wasn't for me. It was a 5-minute deal.
Oh yeah,
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 I was
absolutely.
just guy types in blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Looks at me, says, "You passed with flying colors. Buy
Yeah.
your gun." And
Yeah.
I'm thinking that is not a background check.
No, it's not. And I mean, it's
No.
a really, really broken system all the way around. And it's, this is not. I'm not making political statements. I mean, this is just fact. There are so many
Oh,
issues
yeah,
going
just,
on, and
yeah.
it's compounded issue after compounded issue.
It took years and years and years to get to this point.
And we're at a point where it's irreversible. I mean, that's fact too. It's irreversible.
yeah.
I mean, we're at a point where, like I said, the debtors are coming knocking on the door, and payments due. And unfortunately, a lot of people are paying with their lives,
Yeah.
and we need all hands on deck. We cannot just say, "Well, it's the police department's job to
No.
investigate and take care of this." And I reported, I did my job, and life goes on.
No more.
It's not
We
that
can't-
simple.
Yeah. We need to get involved.
Yeah,
We really
we
do.
we really need to watch out for people and help people get help. For people battling addictions. Shake hands with people who've overcome addictions and really work with them to help other people break
Right.
their addictions.
Right.
It's a problem, and it's a humanitarian crisis too. We've got to help people, and we've got to watch out for kids, and innocent and vulnerable. All these women, just Sarah McDougal is just posting multiple articles a day. There's another one. There's another just today. There's another one. This mom and her 13-year-old daughter and I think 9-year-old daughter, all shot and killed by the man as they were packing their suitcases
To leave.
to leave the
Yeah.
house to find safety.
Right.
He shoots and murders all three of them. This is going on over and over and over. When you know somebody who says they're unsafe, take their word for it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, people don't joke about that.
No.
They don't joke about it. If you don't know how to help, seek out the advice of someone who does. Seek, our legal authority, our policemen, our mental health people. They will talk to you.
Yeah.
They will help
Yeah.
as much as they can. But I think we're living in a world now that says we need involvement. We no longer can push the problems off on somebody
Nope.
else. And I love how you phrase that, Jimmy. It's time we need to roll up our sleeves and get involved with
Have to
people
do it.
again.
Yeah,
We
you
have
have
to,
to
if
do
we're
it.
going to protect our children and our young adults or any adult that are struggling to the point of taking their own lives, something's wrong. We
Yeah.
need to provide hope in some way. And it doesn't have to be big. I used to get caught up in that when I was younger and think I had to do some big, bold thing. I never thought that $5 or $10 could help a family. I always thought it had to be 500, which I didn't have.
Yeah.
That's not true
Nope.
at all. Not at all. Sometimes a pot of soup brought to a family that evening can relieve so much stress because mom and dad are totally unable to
Yep.
deal with fixing the food for the family.
Yeah.
So rather than the kids go without food, you bring some food.
Yep.
Could be something that simple,
Yeah.
that practical.
Yeah, I think realistically we're in for a tough year. So all hands on deck. I mean, be careful how you spend your time too. And that I'm talking to myself too. I've kind of had to reprioritize a lot of things in my life and realize like, all right, maybe sitting on the couch and watching TV for 2 hours is not the best use of my time for the day. Not that it's wrong to take time to relax,
It's
but
not, and that's important too with your family to gather together and spend
Yeah.
time. I think we've lost the value of talking, communicating, and spending time together.
Yeah.
There is great value in that. Invite someone in. If you know a child who doesn't have that in their home, invite them into your home for 2 hours a week. It's not going to kill you, but it may save that child.
yeah, for sure.
Right.
So all hands on deck. We need
We
you guys.
love you all. We
Yeah.
appreciate you listening. We know that you're out there and wanting to help. This situation is a crisis, abuse. Many of you who are listening to this podcast have personally experienced abuse. You know what it is to live in an abusive situation in your church, your homes, your schools. Now it's time for us to use the strength that we've been given to help others.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So if we do it, we can start turning this thing around. So let's help our neighbors in need and spread some love. Love you guys, and thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.